demons, shadow people, even UFOs. The paranormal presents itself to us in various ways, sometimes benevolent, but oftentimes terrifying. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should be listening to this show as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. Today's episode features 6 allegedly true scary stories of encounters with the supernatural and paranormal that will have you on a manhunt for every Ouija board in existence to end that abomination for good. Enjoy. Send me your scary stories of the unexplained so I can narrate them. Just go to darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. Tormented by an unclean spirit. From John Cragen. These events occurred from the summer of 2015 to the summer of 2017. I'm from southern Ontario, Canada. I'm a very devout Christian, and I firmly believe in the existence of what the Bible calls unclean spirits, or familiar spirits, commonly called demons today. Before I became very devout, my brother, I'll call him Joshy for security reasons, and a family friend, I'll call Brian, decided to mess around with the Charlie Challenge. For those who don't know, the Charlie Challenge is a game where you place a pencil on a piece of paper, with yes or no written on either side of the paper. Charlie is said to be a ghost. You ask him questions, and if Charlie hears you, the pencil will move until the lead points at yes or no. Joshy, Brian, and I were at the beach, Sauble Beach, during the summer of 2015. We were doing the Charlie Challenge. A few seconds after we asked the first question, we heard what sounded like a small stone falling on metal. We thought it may have been a seagull dropping something, but that idea was soon thrown out the window when we noticed there were no seagulls to be seen anywhere. To add to this, there was nothing metal nearby either, even though the sound seemed like it was only a couple of feet away from us. The next day, Joshy and I went to Brian's house. His house was within walking distance from our cottage, and the beach was right across the street. Brian told us that he heard strange sounds coming from the kitchen the night after we did the challenge. He also showed us what looked like red marks on his torso. This got us pretty freaked out, but after a few days it faded and we brushed it off. The summer of 2015 went by. I started grade 8 that autumn. Nothing eventful happened from autumn of 2015 to April of 2016. My family moved to a new house in May of 2016. I was finishing up grade 8 and preparing for my first year of high school the next year. When I moved to the new house, I felt an uneasy, almost demonic feeling when I went into the basement. It felt like I wasn't alone. One day I was alone in the house, and I heard my name called from somewhere in the kitchen. When I went into the kitchen to check it out, I didn't see anything. I thought I was just hearing things, so I went back to doing what I was doing. I finished grade 8. Summer of 2016 was largely uneventful in regards to strange or spiritual activity. I started grade 9 in September of 2016. Strange occurrences became common around the house. It got to the point where I began to rebuke the spirits in the name of Jesus Christ. After I started doing that, things seemed to die down, and nothing else happened for a while. The next occurrence happened back at Sauble Beach in the summer of 2017. Joshy and I were at Brian's house experimenting with ghost apps on the Google Play Store, when, suddenly, Brian began to sweat like crazy. This was weird, because the air conditioner was on and at full blast. I freaked out and began to record a video of what was happening with Brian. A few seconds later, Brian said he felt a burning sensation on his torso, and out of nowhere, his guitar fell off its holding spot on the wall. The skin on Brian's torso turned red. This happened for around 2 minutes, and all suddenly stopped at once. I started reading the Bible's many condemnations of conjuring up spirits. Then I began to wonder if Brian, Joshy, and I had conjured an unclean spirit when we did the Charlie challenge back in 2015. Maybe we had caused this haunting ourselves. Strange experience at my apartment building. From Eldritch Guardian. Several years ago, I lived in an apartment building that was nestled right up against a thick patch of woods, which my girlfriend, now wife, and I had taken long walks in several times. There was a nice little creek and a stinky bog deeper in the woods. We lived on the second floor, and there was this beautiful old tree we could see from our bedroom window and our deck. A really old hickory tree about 4 feet in diameter, with the lowest branch about 7 feet high. This was our favorite tree while we lived at those apartments. Several strange instances happened while I lived at that apartment, but I'm going to cover one now that was probably the single coolest thing that has ever happened to me. It was more beautiful and surreal than scary. We had been living in our apartment for a few years together. It was one of those that essentially had a stairwell outside the front door that connects the front doors of all the apartments on each level with a small, squarish landing. These were not the nicest apartments in the world, but they were what we could afford at the time. I had to take the trash out late one autumn night. It was close to midnight. The dumpster was thankfully located just a short jaunt away from our building at the edge of the woods, maybe 60 yards at most, far enough away to not have to smell the stink of garbage on hot summer days. I had the bag of trash in my hand and was walking toward the dumpster when I heard a rustling in the bushes to my right. The hair on the back of my neck and arms stood up on end, and I took the last few steps toward the dumpster, throwing the trash bag into it. When I turned around, a small gray fox was standing in the middle of the parking lot, staring right at me. We were both frozen in place. I waved at it, and the fox kept moving along. When I got into the apartment, I told my wife about what had happened. We both thought it was really amazing. We're huge animal lovers and enjoy seeing animals of all kinds. We have a healthy respect for nature and keep our distance while admiring animals. So for a solid week after the sighting, I had the strangest dreams about foxes. Foxes would be dancing around our apartment in my dreams, and I recall one where I looked out the window by my bed, and I saw several of them chasing around these small bluish-white flames that were floating in the air. I believe that these were foxfire. Not sure what else they could be, given the circumstances. I woke up feeling refreshed and energized after these dreams. I was really sad when I woke up one morning and didn't remember my dreams from the night before. I thought this meant an end to my beautiful dreams. I got up at 6 a.m. to get ready for work. It was still dark outside. I got ready pretty quick, and I was out the door by about 6:25. The sun hadn't crested over the trees just yet. I walked out the door and turned around, locking it. I then walked down the few flights of stairs to the spot I'd parked my car. I unlocked the door and went to get in. But as I was turning to sit down, I noticed something huge standing near the tree in front of our apartment balcony. Underneath the tree was the most massive white fox I've ever seen, before or since. Its head, while it was sitting, was as tall as the lowest branch on the old hickory tree, about 7 feet. It was almost shining with an inner glow. It was so bright white. It had more than one tail and the longest legs I'd ever seen on a fox. Then it looked at me, and it smiled. It then stood up and bounded away, but instead of vanishing into the distance, it just vanished as it left the area of the tree, like it jumped behind some invisible barrier or into a hole in reality of some kind. I stood there, dumbstruck, for about 10 minutes after that happened. While it was going on, I felt no fear, and I actually felt like it had been waiting for me. Foxes have always been my favorite animal since I was a kid, and I'd always enjoyed sightings of them growing up. Whenever we went to the zoo when I was young, I'd always want to go see the foxes first thing, and once again before we left for home. This event left me feeling fulfilled in a way I still can't fully explain, but it was so beautiful and amazing, I wanted to share it with everyone. Not everything that goes bump in the night is something we have to fear. Sometimes the things you can't explain can be beautiful instead of terrifying. College UFO Experience. From Anonymous. Between the years of 2009 and 2012, I was a student at a small public university in the mountains of North Carolina. It was nestled in a small valley in the Smoky Mountains that had originally been Cherokee Indian Territory. It was a beautiful rural campus with wonderful views of the surrounding mountainscape, but not much else. The campus transportation system, called the Catran, was essential to getting around campus. Between the hills and valleys that made up campus and the chilly autumn and winter weather, you couldn't realistically walk from the class buildings to your dorm unless you were prepared for a cold hike. One evening in my senior year, my roommate Brett and I were waiting outside of the library for the Catran. It was late in the evening, around 8 p.m. The Catran stopped running at 9, so we would be on one of the last rides around campus. While we stood at the bus stop waiting, we began to look up at the night sky. Brett stood looking at the moon when he drew my attention to some lights in the sky. There was a trio of lights arranged in a triangle, slowly rotating around the moon. When I first looked up at them, I was convinced it was just a cluster of stars. But then I noticed movement. They were rotating in a clockwise motion around the outline of the moon. The lights would rotate around one light, then around the next, all the way around the moon. We stood there watching the light show for what felt like only a few moments. We were softly speaking to each other about what we could be seeing. Brett thought it was just an ordinary airplane, but the motions didn't fit. I told him that I wasn't sure what it could be and jokingly called it a UFO. Looking back now, I'm convinced that's what it was. We only stopped paying attention to these strange lights in the sky when we heard a car horn honking at us. It was the Catran driver blowing his horn at us. He told us that he had driven past us several times and stopped to let us on, but each time, apparently, we just ignored him, staring off into space. He only got our attention this time because this was the last shuttle for the night, and he didn't want to leave us stranded. I could have sworn we only watched those lights for a few moments. But when I looked at my watch, it really had been nearly an hour. As we boarded the tram, I looked up at the spot we had been watching the lights, only to notice they were gone. The Shadow in the Asylum. From Silver Bullet 54. If anybody dares you to go into an asylum, most people would tell you to agree. For anybody who has a thing for abandoned areas, an asylum has the perfect amount of creepy, historic, silent, and dramatic occurrences to get your heart pumping. It's also somewhere that has the look of a place that's bound to be haunted. The dusty books, abandoned fans, and solitary wheelchairs, all of which aren't exactly pleasant reminders. A certain asylum in Pennsylvania, I won't say where because I don't want people going there. It's where a few friends of mine got the scare of their life. My 3 friends, Fred, Chuck, and Henry, decided to scout out places that were rumored to be haunted. Since they didn't have the money to visit the Queen Mary, or the determination to explore the Eastern State Penitentiary, they settled on an abandoned mental asylum. Since Pennsylvania has at least 4 that I know of, they had plenty of options. The one they settled on was nestled in woods and hadn't been used since the 30s or 40s. Back then it had patients ranging from those afflicted by autism to ADD, which means many patients weren't even insane. They decided that to make sure they didn't miss anything, they would each bring standard ghost hunting fare. Fred was taking a night vision camera. Chuck decided to bring a tape recorder for EVP. and Henry brought an infrared camera, which separates dark shapes from gray and white empty areas. They walked inside. It was about 8 on an autumn night, so it was well past dark. Henry turned on a flashlight and looked around. Fred said, "This place isn't even scary. It's just a dump." The other two decided not to argue, as Fred was usually stubborn and was convinced that he was always right. Chuck walked into an empty room, telling the other two to go on, while he tried to record some EVPs. Henry and Fred split up and soon reached the end of the hall. From there, they could hear Chuck speaking. Fred then began to investigate a kitchen/dining room, and Henry took a blind guess, ending up in the morgue. Fred's night vision camera picked up just a couple of rats and a hornet's nest, which at the time was quiet and still. Henry focused his camera into a freezer, which would have been used to hold a dead body, but didn't see anything. After 20 minutes, Chuck came back and asked Fred and Henry to listen and see if they got anything. Henry was about to put down his camera when a metallic crash sounded right behind him. Henry screamed and dropped his camera. Chuck dove onto the floor by reflex, and Fred ran to them and asked why Henry had screamed. Henry pointed his camera and screamed again. He saw a mass of black, which meant he had caught something. Fred and Chuck said they had enough and sprinted down to the entrance, with Henry close behind. When they played it back, they saw a black mass that was moving from side to side on Henry's camera. Chuck admitted that a couple of times during the EVP session, he felt like someone was prodding him. Turns out Fred had come up with nothing. I saw Henry's video and couldn't give him an answer. Fred and Chuck are at a loss too. Like I said, asylums seem to be the perfect place for hauntings. Henry hasn't shown anyone else's video, and Chuck never revealed what he heard on that EVP. He did tell me that he heard some scary stuff on it, and doesn't like to talk about it. Henry and Chuck plan to take Fred to another asylum in Connecticut in 2020. I hope they turn out okay. After what happened before, Chuck and Henry are being pretty gutsy. Fred probably just wants to catch something. The Hammond Train Horror, from Silver Bullet 54. You've heard of the Barnum and Bailey Circus and Ringling Brothers Circus at least once. Indiana used to have a specific one called the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus that toured around the state every year. However, the year 1918 was far different, as it was the scene of a horrific crash between the circus train and a troop train at a small station between Hammond and Gary, Indiana, called Ivanhoe. Animals, performers, and special attractions were killed in the crash. Things quickly went from bad to worse to downright surreal, as the trains caught fire and soon became a huge inferno. They say that to this day, the haunting and crash are on a constant repeat. That's the history. Now for a report. My cousin Nicholas used to live in Hammond. He would travel to Michigan City all the time. Michigan City is where the train was heading from to go to Hammond. He was spending a night enjoying the crisp autumn air near the site of the crash in 2017 when he heard screams, roars, brays, whinnies, and a huge smashing of metal. He looked around, but there was no train nor animal to be found. He then began to hear crackling flames, and he even smelled smoke. He looked at the tracks and saw something crazy. A train surrounded by foggy red, yellow, and orange flames and lights. He then saw another train appear out of thin air and collide with the flaming train. Then both trains vanished along with the flames, and the noises ended. He told his girlfriend about it, but she didn't believe him. He took her to the area a few months later, and as they waited, they suddenly heard a screeching of metal on metal and saw a transparent train with the numbers 8485 on the side. Engine 8485 was the other train in the accident from a century before. It suddenly stopped, as if it had hit an invisible wall, and his girlfriend heard screams, yells, cries of terror, and trumpeting of elephants, while Nicholas had the same sights, smells, and sounds as before. The two left, vowing never to return to the horrific scene of that accident after such an in-depth and real encounter. Odds are, other people have seen and heard a replay as well. A Hammond resident named Bobby Spencer had a father who experienced the same thing while working as a brakeman. I went to Hammond in 2023 myself after hearing all of that. I didn't see, smell, or hear anything, but I did have this intense feeling of sadness, loss, and fear, even though moments before I was happy, and during that time I wasn't lonely or depressed or anything, not even scared. In other words, the feelings of those crash victims overwhelmed me, giving me different emotions from what I felt before I went there. I was so sad, I almost cried, but I left before any tears were shed. I suppose the spirits of these people and animals will never find peace due to the sudden shock, loss, and ends of their lives, taking their hopes and dreams with them. Rather than rest in eternal bliss, those spirits are trapped on the tracks, constantly replaying a horrific accident that will never be forgotten, but is seldom mentioned. Shadow people, UFOs, and many odd experiences. From Troll's Leaf. I'm a 36-year-old female from Finland. I have many encounters and experiences which I would like to share with you all, so this is going to be a long post. Before I tell you my real stories, there are a few things I need to explain beforehand. First of all, I grew up and lived in a super tiny town in the middle of nowhere, literally, for 22 years. Our home was surrounded by forest as far as the eye could see in all directions. The closest neighbor was 10 minutes of a walk away, and the closest market was half an hour away by car. The nearest city was about an hour's car ride away. We had no internet, no cell phones back in those days. My family of 5 is not religious, so any encounter you're about to read or hear has no connection to religion. However, my big sister and I are spiritual people with 20+ years of experience and knowledge. Neither I nor anyone else in my family has ever used alcohol, drugs, or smoked, so those haven't affected my encounters either. These stories are in random order, so let's begin. Our old home. Our home was an old 2-leveled wooden house that we got from the church because we would have been homeless otherwise. My father has always been handy and self-taught, so he did a lot of fixing and rebuilding in the house, building a second floor and many structures outside in the yard as well. Everything was good and normal, but that would all change when I was about 15. It was a sunny summer day. I was sweeping our big garage's floor, which was separate from the house, when suddenly I felt as if someone had snapped their fingers in my brain. I gasped out loud and almost dropped the broom, screaming in shock in my head about how negatively I'd lived my life. Note, I was bullied in school by students and the headmaster for 5 years, so it left its mark. Not to mention my father was angry 24/7, which made us live in constant fear. From that day on, I lived my life more happily, also opening up to spirits and beings. At first, I started to sense negative energies in our home. It made me feel like I had an apple slice stuck sideways in my throat. The worst feeling always came at night, because I was a night owl, staying easily awake until 6 a.m. Another negative energy I sensed was from the forest right across our front door, a few hundred meters away. That part of the woods was the worst. Inside the house, mainly in the kitchen, I would hear pots and pans clanging hard against each other in the cabin, like they had fallen. But when I went to investigate, all of them were exactly in their right spots. None of them had moved. Once my father heard it too, when he was in the kitchen. He turned to look at me with this confused look in his eyes as I stood there at the doorway. Neither of us said anything. It was all familiar to me, but new to him. There were times when I heard these sounds, but I never bothered with them. They were harmless after all. As a side note, squirrels or other animals did not get inside our home. In Finland, houses are very well built and insulated because we have long, cold winters. That negative energy or being, whatever it was, which was in our home during the nights, was more or less a different thing. Like I mentioned, I stayed awake at night, and almost every night I felt that negativity, getting the feeling of an apple slice being stuck in my throat. My big sister, who has been a spiritual person much longer than I, sensed it too. It never attacked us physically, but its presence was enough to make us feel uneasy. The worst part was going to the bathroom during the night. Now, summer nights in Finland are very bright. The sun barely goes below the horizon, but you can still see clearly at 3 a.m. outside. It looks more like a cloudy day instead of night. So going to the bathroom during summer nights was okay. It was totally different during autumn and winter, when the sun sets much earlier. Darkness consumes almost 19 hours of your day. Our bedrooms were on the second floor, which was basically just one big room cut openly in half. Mother and father slept on the other side, the front yard side, and my brother and I slept on the backyard side. My big sister didn't live at home anymore during these times. My bed was right next to the railing that prevented me from falling down the stairs, which led to the living room. Right next to the stairs was a bright nightlight for safety reasons, so that none of us would fall down the stairs during the night while going to the bathroom or getting a drink of water. That night, I got up, went down the stairs, walked through the living room, and stopped at the living room's doorway. The doorway, which led to hallways 2 and 1, was right to my left, but across from me in the cottage's wall was a wide and big mirror. I feared that mirror so much during the dark nights. It always felt like I would see someone or something evil and dark staring back at me, so I avoided looking at it. I dashed to my left, going through hallway 2, entering hallway 1 where our small bathroom was. Hallway 1 was small and had a front door. Right next to it was this small window. On the wall across from the bathroom's door were 3 other small windows, all facing towards that eerie part of the forest I mentioned earlier. Whenever I went to the bathroom during these dark nights, I felt like there was a line of evil beings staring in through those windows. Those 3 other windows were meters high above the ground, so no one could have been looking in. Back in those days, we also had a male Belgian shepherd who barked at everything and everyone, so no one could come into our yard without him hearing and alarming everybody. When I left the bathroom that night, I rushed out of that first hallway, walking through the second, and came face to face with that horrible mirror again in the cottage. I usually managed to not look at it, but sometimes I did, feeling more or less relieved when I didn't see anything, even though I still felt something. Coming back to the base of the stairs leading upstairs was the worst. After a few steps, I, like my siblings, felt a dark presence standing right behind us. I rushed up the stairs, sometimes looking behind to see no one at the base of the stairs, but I still knew whatever it was there, looking at me. I think this thing attached itself to me since I kept feeling it behind me, even years after we sold our house. I still fear mirrors during the nights. Only after I drew an art piece of myself looking at the mirror, seeing this black hooded figure behind me, did it vanish. I think it realized only then that I was aware of it. Other scary encounters at my old home. These encounters happened during the darkest times of the year. For some reason, the activity was more, active during autumn and winter. One night I was in my bed around 3 or 4 a.m., trying to get some sleep, even though I still wasn't tired. I was on my back, suddenly feeling strong negative energy radiating from my parents' side. Just by turning my head to my left, I clearly saw everything in their room. Their bed was on the left, the end of it facing a small fireplace. Right next to this fireplace was a huge and wide black maggot, and it was only a few meters away from me. The top part, which was standing up, was as tall as the fireplace with the flue, maybe my height, 5.3 feet, if not taller, while the lower part, maybe as long as the upper body part, was lying against the floor. It had huge bulging eyes on the side of its head. The outer circles of its eyes were red, and the inner side was yellow with small black pupils. On either side of its body were red-yellow round marks. If I had to describe it with a living real maggot, I would say it was very close to an elephant hawk moth, except it was fully black with those red-yellow marks and eyes, with that horrible negative energy and intense gaze. It just stood there, staring at me without even blinking. I was so scared. I think I've never been so scared before. I turned my back to it, hiding under my blanket. I closed my eyes and prayed to Archangel Michael to come shoo it away, to keep it away from me and protect my home and family, just like my sister had taught me to do. It didn't take more than a few seconds after my prayer for that negative energy to fade away. I waited a bit more, finally daring to look. It was gone. The maggot thing had left, and I felt so thankful and relieved. But you can bet I didn't sleep that night. I believe one reason why there was so much negativity in my old home was my father. He was always angry, hard to please, very strict with rules, and so on. I can say we had no normal childhood, thanks to him. His anger and negativity attracted who knows what into our home from who knows where. However, I believe most of the things came into our home from that nasty forest across our front door, but I'll get to that later. More nighttime experiences. These experiences were short and thankfully not as scary, but very special, so I want to share them too. Please note that in every story, the nightlight was always on during the night. Night 1. As usual, I was on my back on my bed with my eyes closed around 3 a.m., still feeling pretty awake. A bright and big nightlight shone behind the railing across the staircase on my right, illuminating the whole upstairs entirely. As I kept lying still, I suddenly started to feel invisible water on my face. It was slightly and pleasantly warm, very relaxing. I didn't bother to open my eyes since I felt so peaceful and safe. I felt this water sensation going down the middle of my forehead like a waterfall, slowly traveling down my face. I have to say I have never felt so relaxed and safe as I did during this moment. It didn't last long, but it meant so much to me. It stopped as suddenly as it started. I slept very well that night. Night 2. Again, I was on my bed on my back, eyes closed. I wasn't tired even though the clock must have read around 3 or 4 a.m. This time, I didn't feel the water, but I heard the most heavenly music I've ever heard before. In all honesty, there are no sounds or words on earth to describe what I heard. And no, it wasn't the TV or radio or neighbors. Just like myself, my father has always been an extremely light sleeper. He would not have been able to sleep if the TV or radio were on. Our neighbors also lived 1 kilometer away, so we never heard any sounds or saw any intrusive lights, not from them. There was also no traffic, since we lived at the end of a small forest road, far away from the main roads. I listened to this music in awe, almost in tears, since it touched my soul so much. It felt so homey. I feel sad I've never heard this music again, or anything even similar. Night 3. Once more, I was on my bed on my back, facing the ceiling with open eyes. All of a sudden, I noticed something coming down through the ceiling. It was the bottom half of an old armor. I watched silently in slight surprise as this armor came through the ceiling soundlessly, slowly landing by the side of my bed. When its toes touched the floor, it vanished. I was surprised and stunned in a good way. You don't see that every day. And I haven't ever since. I wonder where that armor came from. To my knowledge, our home spot had no history or activity that could have caused that or explained it. Summer Day Encounter. One summer day, I was standing in the kitchen. I had a clear view of the cottage's doorway. We had an open concept design back in the early 90s. I stood sideways, suddenly seeing a solid black shadowy figure standing at the doorway. Now, the doors were open all the way to the outside, since my other family members were outside with our dog, who was off-leash 24/7. He never left our yard, and like I said before, he barked at everything and everyone. Our old wooden floors also creaked under the slightest weight, so I would have heard the steps. So I knew it wasn't a real person standing at that doorway. I eyed him for a moment from the corner of my eye. He was wearing a black cape with a hood, being fully covered by it. I didn't see his face, but his shape otherwise was like a person, a human. Only when I turned to face him did he vanish. I was slightly stunned, but didn't bother with it more than that. As long as they didn't have negative energy, I didn't worry. Dragon Ball Z experience. Once again, on a sunny summer day, I was in the living room, watching Dragon Ball Z back in 2003, when it aired in Finland for the first time. I don't recall which episode it was exactly, but I remember seeing Vegeta on the screen. God, I had a huge crush on him as a teenage girl. I smiled and thought, he's such a wonderful character. Instantly, right after that, I felt two fingers taking a strip of my long blonde hair between them, sliding down extremely gently. I knew I was alone at the time, my family was outside, and no stranger could have come in without our dog noticing. I smiled and said, "Thank you," in my mind. I don't know who it was, but the touch was so loving and gentle, it made me happy. Meteor encounter. My brother, sister, and I stood on the second floor, staring out the window during a dark autumn evening, watching the stars. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. I was eyeing the sky right above the treetops when I saw this big black meteor-like ball coming down fast. It had blue flames and small regular flames. It went behind the treetops and most definitely hit the ground behind those trees. But there was no sound, no shaking ground, nothing. My little brother saw it too, but my big sister didn't for some reason. It wasn't a star, nor plane, helicopter, or anything like that. It honestly looked like a black meteor, and it was quite big. I wanted to go check it out, but I was too afraid, since my father had warned us to never wander into those woods. He had done that once, stepping on an unmarked well. Luckily, he didn't fall in fully, but he did hurt his leg, so we never went to investigate. No one else showed up to investigate it either. I still wonder what it was. Yellow lights and UFO. I was maybe 6 years old when my big sister and I saw huge yellow lights a few times while walking home from school. There were always two of them. It was winter when we saw these lights many times, always in the same spot. They always appeared behind us, looking like a car's long front lights. My sister always told me to walk by her side so that a car could pass by, except there was never a car. We were the last ones living at the end of that road, and car lights couldn't shine to that curvy spot behind the woods from our neighbor's yard, which was 1 kilometer away. Once, these two huge round lights appeared on the side of our home when we walked towards home. There were never any sounds. They just appeared and disappeared like that. but I think I might know what caused them. I was coming home alone during a dark afternoon, maybe around 3 or 4 p.m. It was late autumn, early winter time, so the sun rose at 10 a.m. and set at 2 p.m. I climbed up the stairs on our porch, looking inside through the window next to our front door. Back then, we had a male German Shepherd. He was never aggressive towards us, so I was confused when I saw him in the first hallway. He was keeping his head down, hair all stood up. He was growling. I'd never seen him like that before. Then, something made me look up to my right. Right next to our porch, which was many meters above the ground, was a floating small UFO. It had a dome on top, a disc-shaped middle part with colorful lines going around the ship with a line of small round windows, and at the bottom was another dome. Inside the ship was a grayish-green light that I saw through the windows. I wasn't afraid or numb or anything like that. I just was. I stared at it for some seconds before I saw movement. From left to right, a figure inside the ship moved around, stopping behind the second window. It turned to face me. It looked like an alien. Big head, big black eyes, the usual. It looked at me and raised its long, skinny hand, waving at me slowly. I couldn't see its mouth, but I could sense its happiness. That made me happy, so I waved back with a smile. Now, the next part is confusing, since I don't know which is the real memory. 1, I opened the front door and stepped inside, our dog still on alert, with his head down and hair up, but no longer growling. Or 2, I just suddenly was standing inside the hallway, in front of our dog who looked at me with concern, like he was making sure I was okay. I was okay, but I never did see this alien or UFO again. Shadow person on a birch tree. I don't remember why I was going downstairs during a summer day, but I stopped in front of the window on the second floor. As I looked outside, I noticed something on the birch tree in our backyard. Someone or something was sitting on one of the branches. It was a solid black humanoid figure. It was squatting on a branch quite high up on the tree, at the same level as our second floor window. It had no face nor any other visible features. It had overly long arms that hung down with 2 long legs. I wasn't afraid, but rather surprised. However, I had no time for it, so I just ignored it and went downstairs. Later on, I learned that this creature was a shadow person. I find them quite fascinating. I would see it a second time one school morning. I was in middle school, which was further away, so a taxi came to pick us up, taking us to a faraway bus stop. At one point during the trip, I felt horrible. I didn't want to go to school since I was bullied, but no one knew about it. I was never brave enough to tell someone. As I rolled all kinds of thoughts in my head, I noticed something by the side of the taxi, at the edge of the forest. It was the same shadow person. It was running on all fours, keeping up with the taxi easily. I saw it only then, when it emerged from the shadows of trees and bushes, with morning sunlight hitting it. I was shocked, but soon happiness and relief filled me. It had come to escort me, to tell me I would be all right. I just knew it. It wasn't bad or evil. I smiled at it, saying thank you in my head. Right after my thanks, this shadow person stopped in a big shadow, and I never saw it again. I hope it still lives in those woods, knowing how happy it made me back then, how grateful I still am to it. Winter Troll. It was a cold winter night, and I was awake, coming into the kitchen. As I turned the lights on, I noticed a white ball of fur sitting back towards me on the windowsill. It was the size of a kitten or so. However, its tail was long and thin, having a black tassel at the end. I saw it only for a few seconds, when I turned the lights on. It turned to look at me, then jumped down from the windowsill so quickly my eyes could not follow it. I know it wasn't a kitten or any other wild animal. I think it was some kind of winter troll because it looked a lot like one small white troll doll I had back in my childhood. Bird that called my brother's name. One summer day, my little brother and I sat on the couch in the living room. The couch was against the back wall near the stairs going upstairs. We had a window open upstairs at the time with a bug net to get some fresh air in. All of a sudden, both my brother and I saw a small bird fly to the window upstairs. It was weird, but we didn't mind it too much. However, what we did mind was the fact that the bird called out my brother's name once before flying off. My brother and I stared at one another, surprised, not saying a word. I still don't know what it was, since in Finland, we don't have wild birds that can talk or mimic speaking. Particular crows, yes, but it's illegal to have wild animals as pets here, which I think is a good thing. Wild animals belong in nature, after all. Anyway, there were many times when I would hear an unknown voice, female or male, call my name inside the house. It was always inside the house, too. It was never bad, though, or scary, just weird and confusing. Evil forest. Now to that evil forest I talked about. Like I've said many times so far, the forest right across from our front door was bad, or evil if you want to call it that. It was honestly dark, vibrating with negativity, which made me fear it. It was normal during the summers, but during autumn and winter, when most parts of the day were dark, it was totally opposite. Back then, my father had a stallion. He left him in my care. Every evening, I went to feed him at 8 p.m., giving him water and hay for the night. However, the trip to the stable, which was at the other end of our yard, was different. Right away, when I stepped outside on the porch, I could feel lots of eyes on me, staring at me from the forest, evil ones. I ran all the way to the stable, feeling terrified with those gazes on my back. Only after getting inside the stable did I feel safe, but I had to do the same when going back inside the house. I ran from the stables to the porch, going in as quickly as possible. Only after I locked the front door behind me did I feel safe. It was horrible. Not to mention all those red orbs I saw at the edge of the woods at different levels. I didn't know whether they were eyes, orbs, or what, but I know red is never a good color in these kinds of situations. A few times I saw yellow orbs, which didn't freak me out, but they were a small comfort in the end. Still, to this day, I wonder what's in that forest. I'd like to investigate, but not having my own car or a license, it's impossible. I'm not even sure I would like to know the truth in the end. Out-of-body/sleep paralysis experiences. I never had any of these until I moved to my current apartment, after my big sister moved out about 11 years ago. All was good at first until one night I woke up. I couldn't move or talk. I freaked out then, trying to scream myself awake in panic. But that didn't help. I begged Archangel Michael to come help me, and soon after, I passed out, waking up later normally. Many other times were the same, either in my place or somewhere else. I always freaked out and tried to scream myself awake. Once I was visiting my big sister when this happened. She has a small flat with one room, a tiny kitchen, and a tiny bathroom. She slept on the bed at the end of the room while I slept on the couch. I woke up on my back, my right arm up on the back of the couch. I realized I was having sleep paralysis, so I tried to scream myself awake again. Suddenly, I saw a white glowing being emerging from my big sister. It walked to me behind the couch, taking gentle hold of my arm and placing it back in my lap before vanishing. I woke up and told this to my sister later the same day. We both instantly agreed that the light being had been my sister's higher self who came to my rescue. Many other times I just wake up, realizing I'm walking inside either my apartment, my sister's, or my mom's if I'm visiting either of them. The moment I realize I'm having an out-of-body experience is when I try to turn on the lights. My hand just goes through the switch. It annoys me and I angrily tell myself to get back in my own body. It works, though I still don't enjoy those experiences. Ghost in the attic. On one occasion, I've seen a ghost. My mother and I took my big sister to her friend's house when we were teenagers. The house at the farm was hundreds of years old. As I sat in the back seat of the car, I looked up at the attic window. There I saw an old woman's face. She looked very sour. I knew in an instant she was a spirit. I wasn't afraid, just fascinated. She didn't stay behind the window for long. When I looked away and looked back, she was already gone. I later told my sister about it, and she knew to tell me that her friend's grandmother lived in the attic as a spirit. Sadly, the house burned down last month. I hope the grandmother has now found peace, since she was quite an angry-looking ghost. She apparently pushed people down the stairs if they dared come to the attic, which was her place. Guardian Angel. We all have a guardian angel from our birth to our death. I feel blessed to have managed to meet mine. However, it happened via a dream. I was very open to getting messages and visions via dreams when I was younger. In this dream, I was dancing in a circle with angels on pink clouds. 5 of them I didn't know, but the angel to my left was Michael, and the angel to my right was my guardian angel. Well, when I was working at a daycare in 2003 through 2004, I was lying on my stomach on the bed between 2 children. I was reading them a story to help them fall asleep and take a nap. In the middle of my reading, I felt a big warm palm on my lower back. It was such a loving touch that it made me smile and filled me with gentle joy. I know it wasn't any of the adults, since I was in the room alone, and it wasn't any child, since the kids were small, between 2.5 and 4 years old. One was already asleep, and the other was still looking at me. Eventually, they both were sleeping, and I got out of the room, still feeling amazed by the touch. I just knew it was my angel. The second time my angel stepped in to help me, I was walking to a nearby market with my mother during the summer. It was maybe 8 years ago, if not longer. In the nearby yard were 2 girls, maybe 10 at most, who were going to take a hunting dog for a walk. As my mom and I walked forward, 2 bikers went past us, but we all stopped when we heard those girls scream. My mother was way ahead of me going down the hill, stopping to wait for me as I spun around, coming to stand behind the bikers. I saw the dog, running away from the girls without a collar or a leash, right beside the road. The girls screamed and yelled at the dog, but it didn't listen. It was then when I felt a strong but gentle, encouraging push on my back. Like a mother who pushes her child forward, telling them to be brave and say hi. I've never felt so confident as I took firm steps forward, stepping out behind the bikers. The dog was still far away, but I pointed in front of me, saying loud and firm, "Here!" And the dog came. He ran to me instantly, stopping to stand in front of me sideways, panting hard. The other girl yelled at me to grab him, but I didn't. I pet him instead, knowing deep inside he wouldn't go anywhere. The girls came and took the dog. Bikers stared at me like I was something beyond this world. After I was sure the girls would be okay with the dog, which appeared to be not well trained, I turned around and headed to my mom, continuing our trip to the market. I felt and still feel so amazing when I think of that moment, when my angel gave me that push. Who knows what would have happened to the dog and the girls if my angel had not given me that push. Shadow people at my sister's place. I used to visit my big sister 4 times a year when she was living with her roommate in a bigger apartment. During one of my visits, something happened. Her roommate's family was coming to visit, so there wasn't enough space for all of us, and my sister went to spend the night at her best friend's house, giving me her room. It was late, and I lay on my back on her bed. The bed's head was against the wall. On my left was a wall with a big window. Across from me was another wall. To my right was a wall with closets, and right next to the bed on my right was a door, which was closed for privacy reasons. The curtain was open and city lights were shining outside, brightening the room. I saw everything clearly. I closed my eyes, sighed, and relaxed. You know that moment when you close your eyes very tight and everything goes black? Well, imagine a second layer of that darkness coming inside your eyelids. That happened to me. Everything became more black. In bewilderment, I opened my eyes, coming face to face with a solid black face. It had no eyes, no eye sockets, no nose, no mouth, no hair, no ears. Nothing that a normal person would have. Just a simple and clear black silhouette. It was right there in front of my face. If this shadow person had a nose, it would have been pressed against mine, hard. It was so close to me. I stared at it for a second or two before it seemingly realized I was awake and looking at it. This shadow person jumped back in clear panic, standing up by the side of the bed. It was tall and thin. From there, it glided with great speed past the bed, right through the closed bedroom door, all done without a sound. I sat up, staring after it. I was rather surprised and happy, but also felt sorry for the poor thing. I know some shadow people are curious about us humans, but they're also very shy, not wanting to scare us. This was one of them. So I apologized to it in my mind, then lay back down. I was able to sleep well that night without it visiting me again. However, it would show up to me a few days later. I was sitting in the living room where I could see the kitchen and my sister's roommate's closed door, while my sister sat on a chair across from me. Her roommate sat between us, playing with her PS3. I sat on my mattress on the floor. As I sat there, I noticed a figure from the corner of my eye. It was the shadow person, the very same one from that one night. It stood shyly at the kitchen's doorway near the roommate's door. Its body language and energy gave out a sign that said, "I'm scared. I'm shy. Please don't be afraid. I'm unsure. I didn't mean to scare you earlier." I felt bad for it once again, so I smiled at it after turning to look, thinking, "It's all right. I'm not afraid." This shadow person visibly relaxed, standing up straight instead of trying to bend forward, making itself small and hiding. It felt happy, but most of all, relieved. After it stood straight and relaxed, it disappeared. I later told my sister about it, and she informed me that her roommate, just like she herself, had seen this same shadow person a few times, but the roommate refused to talk about it or listen to anything about it because she feared it. That's why my sister and I always talked about it and other supernatural things when her roommate was at work. Because to us, the spirit world isn't scary if you know how it works and how to handle it. These days, I wonder where that shadow person is. Is it still in that apartment? Or has it moved on to somewhere else? Helping a soul move on. This happened in 2016. I was alone at home around 1 a.m. when I suddenly got a huge urge to meditate. Back then, I meditated very rarely, I had no idea what was going on, but I had a feeling someone desperately wanted to speak to someone. I lit a candle and incense, said a protection prayer, and started to meditate after grounding myself. It didn't take long for me to travel to a nearby hospital, landing in a room with a bed. On the hospital bed lay a skinny old man, clearly weak and sick. I'd never seen him before, still haven't, and yet instantly I knew who he was. Beside the bed were his son, his daughter, and my mother, because my mother was dating this son who was in the room. No one else saw me except the dying old man. I smiled softly at him as I made my way to the edge of the bed. Sitting down, facing him, I placed my hand on his, holding it gently, then asked, "Do you see bright light?" He whispered happily, "Yes." I smiled softly and asked, "Are you afraid? Do you feel okay?" He said, "No, I'm not, and I feel great, warm and calm." I nodded and smiled, saying my last words. "Then go. You're free to go if you want." He felt so happy and relieved after hearing that, and finally relaxed. Soon after, my meditation ended, and I went to bed. When I woke up the next morning and checked my Facebook, my mother had sent me a private message saying this old man had passed away during the night, around 1 a.m. I felt happy and relieved he was now gone, since, as my mom had told me, the man had had a rough life with an abusive wife who kept him starved and abused in many other ways. He was now in love and light, in peace and free. He only needed someone to come and give him permission to leave. At times, souls don't move on because their loved ones keep telling them not to go. It's important to support our loved ones, encourage them to heal, but we also must learn when to let go and give them permission to leave, no matter how much it hurts to let go. They deserve love and peace, always remaining in our hearts and minds. These were my experiences, at least so far in life. I hope you all enjoyed them despite the fact that this was quite a long set of stories, maybe not so well written or told. But thank you for listening nonetheless. I wish you all the best lives.